Yeah, so thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to present and discuss Migrant Marseille. It's a book, of course, but it's let's say foremost a topic and a research and a design studio. So the way that this session is structured is a small introduction on the topic itself, the work of research, as well as urban design proposals, because ultimately I think one of the focus of that particular research project is to discuss the role of architects and urban planners and designers in engaging with questions of governance and let's say social and political topics, which is something that has been, let's say, very present in or even a guiding force in the work of Marc Angélil, who's also joining us for the conversation. Marc has been a professor at ETH Zurich and is now holding the Kenzo Tange visiting professorship at Harvard GSD, and also Leonard Streich, which is here with the book in the background, very dedicated member of Something Fantastic, who is part of the teaching team as well, and behind the entire, let's say, gestalt of the book. And then myself also as editor and also teaching the Master of Advanced Studies in Urban Design, which is basically the kind of very infrastructure armature behind the work. And I see that a few of our alumni are joining the crowd, so that's also very nice. Just one word about me. I'm now assistant professor of urban design at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and I will be presenting this work. So 1 second, bear with me when I share my screen. So, yes. So I think we could start by saying that we'd like to discuss Marseille as a test site to propose some answers as to how urban design can respond to contemporary challenge, what I mentioned earlier, and this question on the role of design disciplines in that. So in this case, we are addressing migration, public housing, and building maintenance, among other topics. We are asking ourselves, how can design disciplines be propositional, using the tools of architecture and planning to offer new responses to counter the economic forces that generate increased poverty, while offering a constructive critique of bad governance, as well as advocate for equity. So I mentioned this research and design work on Marseille was conducted in the frame of the Master of Advanced Studies in Urban Design at ETH Zurich at the chair of Marc Angélil. And here you see on 5th November 2018, 2 buildings, one of them public property, collapsed in the area of Noailles, which is a popular, rather poor but central area of the city with a building stock from the 18th century. The New York Times dedicated to the drama a long article calling Marseille the French Detroit. In fact, they changed the title after that. I think they got some complaints, but they highlight in this article the bad governance for the lack of housing stock maintenance and the crisis that is looming. 8 people lost their lives, people hailing from Algeria, the Comoros, France, Italy, and Tunisia. And it's been almost exactly 2 years ago, as titled by this local newspaper, La Marseillaise. It says, 2 years after November 5th, the slum issue remains unaddressed, as the neighborhood was actually holding a commemorative ceremony. So to situate a little bit, here you have Marseille, a Mediterranean, European, and French city. But what this devastating toll of urban decay actually reflects is both the diversity of the district where this drama happened, but also the hardship of living in Marseille, a city that has been marked for centuries by migration, poverty, and social struggle. The city is settled between the sea and the mountainous range of l'Étoile. What you see in this kind of historical map, it's a territory that is strongly marked by topography and also hydrography. and a social and economic landscape with this combination of a terroir, a kind of like productive hinterland, with that of the city, the port, the harbor. If you see my mouse, that's that black area here, La Rade. So Marseille is a harbor city, a city harbor, with this perceived proximity to the African continent, from where it drew commodities for industrial economy via colonial activities. And as a trading port, you could see constant flows of people and of goods have shaped the physical, social, and economical geography. And in particular, this kind of successive immigration waves of the past century. So as the harbor expands north of the city, I'll show a map right after, the industrial enterprises such as sugar, soap, and tire factories here on the foreground of this image. This economic boom also fuels migrant labor, Italians, Spaniards, Corsicans, as well as forced migration from the colonies, Africa and Asia, population who then settle in the northern peripheral areas of the city, and with this kind of like makeshift housing. Here, while on the opposite side, the bourgeoisie established itself. So from then on, you could say that the migratory growth was continuous. And on this map, what you can see here is this kind of migration, let's say, waves, and the original, let's say, the origin of the kind of flow, and the date of the independence of this nation, which I will explain later, is actually related. So after 1908, these kind of waves of migration, they are basically corresponding to Russians fleeing the October revolutions, Armenian escaping genocides, or Spaniards leaving Franco dictatorship, and then post-World War II, employment migration from colonized North Africa. And around 1960, what you can see as the post-colonial migrations with these thousands of pieds noirs, which are the French colons leaving independent Tunisia and Algeria, the population that you see here arriving from the boat, along with the Harkis, which are the Algerian natives who had fought for France and were also leaving. And the last and somewhat ongoing wave from 1970s onward, hailing from Comoros, Africa, and more recently Syria. So there's an urban counterpart to this migration history. And post-war, as the whole of France was actually experiencing housing shortages, no homes were constructed for these incoming laborers and their families, who clustered in this simple provisional housing and transit camps, or even overcrowded self-built bidonville. And as you see on this map, with the harbor in the city, the north is bearing the brunt of this, let's say, precarious population. So the northern neighborhoods where the harbor is already home to industries, but then also to the working class and to these precarious migrant workers. Also, so the construction of 90% of the city's social housing projects, which are now corresponding to the zone sensible, difficult areas as defined by the state. And here I just want to attract your attention to the fact that you can see somehow the book appearing here in these pages. This is material that is, of course, part of the publication. So these modernist estates, the grands ensembles that were constructed and located north of the city, were first populated and intended, in fact, for French lower class citizens, whom, as soon as they gained financial stability and access home ownership, vacated the blocks. And then migrants moved into what was at the time quite a coveted apartments. Like here, what you see with Parc Caliste, which is one of the estates that is the most remote from the city center towards the north. Or for those of us who are interested in football, like Castellane, which is also the home turf of Zinedine Zidane, and that you can see here also Parc Bellevue and Félix Piat. Actually, it's the same cité that you can see here on these typological studies of these grands ensembles and this kind of typical, let's say, urban form. So I mentioned Félix Piat, which is located here, along with Euro-Méditerranée, which is, and I will talk about it, located next to the harbor, and Noailles, which is the area that collapsed that I introduced at the very beginning. Those are all somehow contentious sites, let's say, for which we have developed urban design schemes. So Félix Pien is a cité, which is home to a homogeneous community with residents mostly from Comoros. It's what is called a degraded co-ownership, a copropriété dégradée, which corresponds to a kind of estate which is privately owned, but where maintenance costs have exploded. The flat owners are charged as much as 400 euros per month on top of their rent, while the most basic services are no longer provided. This is because the co-ownership has accumulated debt and cannot pay for suppliers and providers. The owners refuse to pay, and the kind of spiral is basically very difficult to exit, and this kind of co-ownership debt rises exponentially. The state response to these kind of issues has been via the National Agency for Urban Renewal, ENRU, to rely on demolitions. What you can see on this drawing is basically in black what has been bought by the state, apartment by apartment, and then demolished. And here the authorities argue that this mechanism can change the image of these neighborhoods, but in practice, and I guess this is something we should discuss, it allows for better police access and increased policing while sending a very critical message to the current occupants. Ecology of Deconstruction is an urban design project for Félix Pien, which taps on the 300,000 cubic meter of waste that will be produced by the neighboring Euro-Mediterranean urban development scheme, which I will talk about right after, which is one of the largest development scheme of this type in Europe. This project proposed to actually build an urban economy, an alternative urban economy, to create jobs for low-skilled workers ignored by official labor markets, capitalizing on waste. So taking advantage of the site's central location and abundance of open space and answering the high unemployment rate of 80% of this estate, the scheme is a kind of a manufacturing platform at the foot of the tower for the reuse, repair, and upcycling of materials from building deconstruction. It's also an industrial cooperative that leases medium, small, and micro enterprises with a public park, with sports fields that are located over the spaces of production, what you see on the map on the right side. So dealing with waste material, this project somehow offers a contextual, climate-aware, ethical, and social urban design reactive to a very, let's say, unjust situation. I mentioned Euro-Mediterranean, Euromed as its nickname, is a massive urban renewal scheme initiated in 1995 that is located in the northern district of Marseille along the industrial harbor. It's a government initiative. It's called Opération d'intérêt national. So it's kind of a state project, if you wish, which can resort to legal mechanisms such as expropriation. And this is usually something you would see for anything from, let's say, harbor or let's say train infrastructures or things like that. But in this case, it's basically a real estate scheme. Out of the 7 billion euros in investment, 5 billion are in fact from private sources. So what you see here is the self-proclaimed, and I quote, Mediterranean eco-friendly district of the future, which is the second phase of the project. The first phase you see in the background with the Zaha Hadid Tower on the right side and the Jean Nouvel Tower on the left in the background. But what you see in the front here on the foreground is basically the second phase of the project with the realized neighborhood called Marseille. It's a 14-hectare development amidst which sits Marseille's flea market. So the flea market is actually a structure itself. It's not an entire. It's not like an open space. It's a kind of a big shed. But the entire area around this flea market functions as what can be called an arrival neighborhood. There is a primary housing shelter for migrants. There are immediate job opportunities at the market and the port, and cheap food and goods. And the Euromed project will affect old factories and working class neighborhoods or small business like the one you see on the left side of the sheet, as well as the village around it, which is currently populated by sub-Saharan African migrants. So here again, tabula rasa is policy. Everything in black is intended to be demolished. What you see is in the middle, this big shed, that is the Marché aux Puces, which is, for instance, on the weekend, basically spreading all across the pavement up to this area here. So if this scheme is successful, it will displace some of the 5,000 impoverished working class residents that are staying in this area to usher in some 30,000 new residents of higher social status. And somehow these urban renewal methods that destroy a historically active industrial district and an arrival neighborhood point at the social exclusion of local inhabitants and of poor newcomers, exposing this population to an uncertain future. The project Port of Entry actually objects to this current modus operandi of development and to the instant urbanism that is done without the inhabitants. It drafts a counter model, incremental and participative. It's planning a diversity of social class, density, and building types. It regulates speculation by targeting different categories of developers, from cooperatives to states to private companies, and preserves existing buildings to accommodate affordable housing, manufacturing, commercial activities, and public space. And also, the project argues that the site, so next to the Marché aux Puces, already offers everything that makes Marseille an arrival and an inclusive city: housing for migrants, informal jobs at the market and the port, and cheap necessary products. So it capitalizes on this existing condition and injects new working spaces and affordable housing. It densifies the existing structure. The scheme does not detract developers, but instead phases the development of the area over time to empower residents and these newcomers, to preserve also the existing qualities for people to arrive, settle, and stay. This urban inclusivity is also to be found in the district of Noailles, in Marseille's historical center, offering cheap housing. Noailles is home to humble populations. Yet after November 5th, 2018, and the building collapse, the Noailles district remains damaged. There is also a kind of a backstory. In 2015, a report had listed some 40,000 apartments across the city as potentially dangerous, some 100,000 people at risk, an assessment that was actually followed by very little official action by the municipality at the time. And these shortcomings of the municipality, which blamed the tragedy on rain rather than on mismanagement, triggered a wave of demonstration calling for the mayor's removal and an end to unsafe housing. The panicked reaction of the authorities was to pronounce many of these buildings uninhabitable via a process called arrêté de péril, which you can see somehow materialize in this image, which basically means the municipality comes with the paper, tells you that the building is unsafe and that you have to leave, and you have like something like 30 minutes to pack your stuff and go. And they've been basically doing that at a large scale, even to buildings that were probably actually quite sound. So here again, this kind of scheme and the black images speaks about the same story and this kind of demolition as policy. The structure that fell were of this trois fenêtres typology, which is a very typical architectural typology of the area. And the tragic event also indicated poor maintenance. And then the adjacent buildings next to the ones that fell were purchased by the municipality and demolished, and they were actually planning to demolish more around it. So meanwhile, no satisfying solution was provided. Some inhabitants are still staying in hotels till today, and some owners also forced to sell their flats as they were unable to pay for the renovation costs, and so on. So local groups are actually demanding a transparent, inclusive plan and decent rehousing rather than top-down profit-driven schemes that are, kind of looming. The project Noailles Calling promotes the value of rehabilitation and maintenance by deploying an existing legal model, the Association Syndicale Libre, ASL, which is a sort of co-ownership organization. It's a legal mechanism that exists that would bring together all co-ownership unions, syndicat de copropriété, which is a kind of, let's say, legal structure that manages the building. So by pooling the capital of all these unions and thus offering guarantees for loans to banks, the ISL can buy and own property. Usually they do that with garages, but in our proposal, they can do that with a block or a single apartment or an entire building. So with the money, the ISL actually operates at all scale. It renovates this trois fenêtres typology, it reconstructs property under arrêté de péril, or it rents apartment to former owners and evicted residents, as well as reviving ground floors and courtyards, as you see in this kind of sort of master plan. So in short, it's a legal model that exists, but has never been really deployed in that sense, that could provide a tool to renovate the existing housing stock without gentrifying Noailles. So these projects, along with 5 others, were exhibited last year in Marseille under the title 8 questions sur des sujets urbains, 8 questions on urban matters. And here you can see the exhibition in the center of the city in our partners' space, Bureau des Guides. Bureau des Guides helped us to kind of build a situated knowledge there. They are locally grounded and they use walking as a critical practice, something that we did extensively with them. So these questions that we ask there are giving some answers and also visually communicating these. They're suggesting cooperative models, but also ask whether the city is actually built in a day or do you have to demolish an entire district to build a new one. So the catalog is actually available in French on the site of our local partners. If you're fast enough, the QR code actually will take you there on the bottom right of the image. And the questions that were formulated in this exhibition works towards increasing the relevance of planning disciplines articulated around making urban and territorial design public knowledge, and something that is also formulated tacitly in the publication. So this idea to foster, let's say, or to foster a planned urban inclusivity is also something that is addressed in the publication with principles that are proposed as codes to design, legal tools, as the one I mentioned earlier with the ISL, that reference existing mechanisms that can support social and spatial inclusion, and also ideas that are compiled as a sort of hands-on manual of prescriptive examples for inclusive qualities. And this way, the idea is to offer kind of an array of perspectives to design cities and neighborhoods that would combat social segregation and aim for urban inclusivity. And here, just a few, a kind of let's say deliberately anti-modern scheme with an anti-zoning for higher diversity, or a proposal for a building lease structure, or co-working courtyards, detached plots, some example of real estate variety, or differential uses at different times. So those are just, let's say, some of the, I think there are about 100 ideas, principles, and tools to be found in the publication, along with the research and the projects compiled in this book, Migrant Marseille, Architecture of Social Segregation and Urban Inclusivity, that came out very recently with Ruby Press. And so we're basically gathered here to perhaps address a few of the questions that the book talk about, also perhaps the making of the book and the modus operandi of research design, output, and a few of the other questions regarding the role of planners in engaging and perhaps even changing urban conditions and entering dialogue with authorities or decision makers. So with this, I would stop my screen share and basically start the conversation. So yeah, I mean, Leonard and Marc, we're, I would say, equally informed on this topic, and I think for me, one of the most interesting, let's say, agenda that emerged from that book, and I think that this is something that could be grounded in a legacy of more research conducted at the chair, but is intrinsically about a certain political engagement of architects and designers in addressing contemporary urgencies. So yeah, I don't know, maybe Marc, you want to kind of expand on that.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of this endeavor, calling in from the other side of the world. And as you can see, it's early in the morning behind me. In any case, Charlotte, thanks also for your presentation. It's always so exciting to listen to you and to hear your narrative on what we have been doing together with the students. So what I would like to do is briefly situate this work in a larger agenda and have just a very few slides which could lead then into a discussion. So let me share my screen. And here we go. So what you see in this slide is a series of publication. I chose 5 to demonstrate the point. And these are publications of a research endeavor that we launched about 13 years ago at ETH Zurich, trying to frame a counter narrative to what was normally taught at the university. I think this was quite important, and we looked particularly at questions of urban poverty all over the globe, looked at segregated, marginalized, stigmatized populations, and the kind of physical realm in which those populations were living. And so, first publication was on the sub-Saharan region, on Addis Ababa. Then we went to India, and then later on to Brazil, and then to Egypt. And the most recent publication is Migrant Marseille. So together, these publications form a program of looking at something that is usually the other side of normal urban design. It's like it's the other side of the coin, and together with students and junior faculty members, we always identified strategies of how to identify alternative models, okay? Models of resistance, and then also identify what could happen after resistance. Each publication is normally framed along 2 trajectories. One deals with the question of theory that you see here on the left. So here an essay that I wrote together with Carrie Saris, La Marseillaise for All, and understanding Marseille as the banlieue of France, as the place of the band. And then, as was very clear with Charlotte's presentation, is we show potential deployments of urban design to identify, let's say, alternatives of how the discipline could be understood. So this is a dialogue between theory and practice. And Leo could maybe also mention that beyond theory and practice, there is always a surprise, kind of methodological surprise in each of the publications. So in this one here, it's these very short ideas that were developed in collaboration with the students. So theory and practice, I think, are extremely important and must be seen in dialogue. Now, what I would like to show you next are 3 levels of governance of what happens after the books are published. And this is quite important. So, and this is where the real work begins. One, at the level of intergovernmental organizations. So in 2012, we had an exhibition and debates at the UN in New York, and then in Medellin at UN Habitat Conference, or presentations and discussions with the International Cooperative Alliance in Kuala Lumpur. Those discussions are usually extremely abstract and could lead to the formulation of policies. The second level is a discourse that is usually established with state institutions and national organizations of a particular country. So on the very far left, you see here um, trying to establish a collaboration with the Cooperative Association of the Amhara region in Ethiopia. In the center, you see the National Housing Secretary who saw our work in Brazil and was very excited and positive about it and asked us to make some proposal. And then on the far left is a meeting with Laila Iskandar, Minister for Informal Settlements in Cairo. And this was just a few months before she found out that the Minister of Informal Settlements would be dissolved. So this was, let's say, an interesting opening that we were able to initiate, but 2 months later, the ministry was dissolved because these settlements don't exist. And then the third level is work with stakeholders in situ. Okay, and this is where it becomes extremely practice-oriented and much less abstract than dealing with UN Habitat, for example. So this is a meeting with the cooperative that we initiate, a multifunctional cooperative in Ethiopia, in the countryside. Then here a community meeting in a community, a municipality at the edge of the Amazons in Brazil, and at the Egypt Urban Forum in Cairo. So these three levels are extremely important because you have to find obviously a way to move from academia to practice. The responses are usually extremely interesting. So I show you two examples of many. On the left is a very positive 3-page review in O Globo. O Globo is the New York Times of Rio de Janeiro, in which our project was positively celebrated and allowed us and gave us an opening to address the Ministry of Housing in Brasilia. And on the right is something that caught us by surprise, is that when our book on Cairo was delivered in Egypt, the Customs and Security Authority basically said, well, we will allow you to enter, we will allow this book to enter the country if some pages are removed, namely those representing informal settlements, because they do not exist. They do not exist in the public imaginary. So here's a kind of pro and contra reception of the work. Generally speaking, and wherever we go, we encounter projects such as those ones. Charlotte mentioned the Euro-Mediterranean project, phase 1 and phase 2. You go to Cairo and you find the same type of development project, or to Mumbai, or in Addis Ababa, or wherever you go, you find the same type of development-led urbanization propagating a kind of world-class city model based on grand projet designed, and the characteristics of these projects are extremely similar. So they are all capital intensive, most often relying on public funding for infrastructure provision. So you get a kind of a dialogue, collaboration between the public and the private sector. Second, they are socially segregated. They are class specific and exclusive, generally asocial vis-a-vis the public at large. Third, they are contextually indifferent. They can be plugged in wherever you want on this globe. So they are aspatial and based on blueprint spatial constellations. Fourth, they are locked in with specific technologies, always the same type of technologies wherever you go on the globe. So they are materially wasteful, carbon heavy, and generally giving lip service to sustainable measures. And last but not least, they are procedurally opaque. So buttressed by political and economic elites from the private and the public sector, facilitating their realization. But if you try to unravel the mechanisms at work, they are absolutely not transparent. So this is where we said, no, 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 okay, out of question, we need alternatives. And in each of those publications, and also now with Migrant Marseille, we try to find alternatives. Okay? And these alternatives are shown both at theoretical and practical levels. And what you see now in the book that came out is basically the subtitle is explaining everything very clearly. We would like to avoid social segregation, and we would like to promote urban inclusivity. So this is a kind of the manifesto behind it. And then maybe Leo can tell us, why the French flag on the cover has been distorted. I think we should talk about it. And Leo, you increased the degree of white, okay, which stands for égalité. So you have blue liberté, white égalité, red fraternité or brotherhood at the end. And interestingly enough, the issue of equity and equality, which is part of the French constitution, is the one that is less nurtured within the country. And I think what's something fantastic want to do here was to just stretch the white and say we need more equality. So those are my thoughts on the publication. Maybe Leo wants to jump in.
You're mute. Classic.
Thanks for the invitation from my side as well. I think, Mark, you're quite right. It's, I guess, focusing on the white on the cover somehow is a hint to what you just mentioned. At the same time, it's a subtle critique. No, I think for the same issues that you also addressed, that we basically have been doing books at the chair that try to be tools in the end to address the ones that are actually dealing with these issues at the city level or the country level, right? So I think the book, if you speak about its design, is somehow on the one hand really trying to show the clear lack of all kinds of things that you're facing as a migrant in Marseille. Highlighting this condition that somehow is managed by the French state, but then not. But at the same time, it's basically also reaching out to exactly those people. No?
And also maybe just one word, I think, and there are a few questions that I think would be very interesting to take afterwards from the audience, but I think that it's interesting to see how the kind of work took place, at this kind of dramatic moment. I mean, we had already started working on Marseille prior to this collapse of these buildings, but in a way, it also happened at a time where the city was already starting to ramp up or prepare for the municipal election, which ultimately resulted in the loss. So the kind of the previous municipality that has been dealing, let's say, frankly, poorly with the issues that Leo was already mentioning, and then that was Marc was highlighting with this kind of, very segregated type of developments. In fact, they lost the municipality, and it's now in the hands of a green party, which is basically trying to repair the years of let's call it bad governance that have left a very heavy or the city still, let's say, trying to recover from. So I think it was also very interesting to try to contribute to that kind of, let's say, I mean, I wouldn't say that the ecological, the electoral battle was part of it, but in a way, it is part of that, let's say, attempt to change, paradigm and perspectives on certain urban issues. I think there are two questions, and maybe one, I will pick up the last one before, because I think it's addressed also to what Marc was talking about and presenting the kind of books. It's from Estela, who says that it's interesting to see the list of publication and to discuss the kind of shift between an onlook onto developing countries to a case which is now a developed country with Marseille, and if you could say something, or if we could say something about the reasons behind these choices of case studies. I think maybe Marc, you can pick up that one, and I will happily continue.
Yeah. Estela's question is fantastic, because it explains at least the last book on Marseille is basically a return to the northern hemisphere, to the global north. And what was interesting in these choices of case studies is that each time, so we started by going from the north to the south, to the global south, in looking for very different forms of poverty. But what we each time encountered, whether in Addis Ababa, India, or Egypt or Brazil, is that these countries that we were investigating acted suddenly as a mirror to what we were doing. And so the last book in the series, with the notion of migrants moving from the south to the north, is a counter movement to what we were doing, moving from the north to the south. We suddenly realized that suddenly the global south was in the north, and vice versa, and those distinctions make very, very little sense. Nonetheless, when we started, we couldn't find any publications on the sub-Saharan region that dealt with urbanization. So there was a kind of blind spot within our field. So this is why we went there, and we encountered a very peaceful form of poverty. And then Brazil was exactly the opposite. The favelas of Brazil are extremely aggressive, and compared to what we had encountered in the sub-Saharan region. And so suddenly we realized that when we talk about informality or popular settlements, that as a matter of fact, they're extremely different. That we cannot throw everything on the similar terms. So we had to be much more subtle in how to address it. So and this obviously would lead to the next question of Estela, is where are we going from there? So I know that Charlotte is doing work in, where are you now?
No, I haven't moved. I'm still focused on the Mediterranean region, but I think it's a little bit related to also what is the first question by Thomas, and I think he would actually like to ask that question himself, which is the question of decentering. And before we actually go into there, I think Thomas, if you're there, would be nice to see you. But I may have to add something relating to this question of decentering, is that I'm actually from Marseille myself, which also helped very much to also enter in this. And I would just like to add to what Marc was discussing. I think that there is also a kind of shift in discourse, perhaps, that happened, let's say maybe 3-4 years ago, where we started to have this kind of ping pong. So for instance, the first year that we worked on Marseille, we did a kind of one semester on Tangier and a second semester on Marseille, and kind of like look at crossed relationship, precisely because we also started to question, the kind of, Western gaze, I guess you can really call it like that. And that is where suddenly the kind of case of Marseille also made a lot of sense as a kind of way to to start to look differently at this question. And the second year we did Beirut, Marseille. So we also used that kind of dialogue to bring in many questions that I think you want to address. So yeah, just if you want to.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm a big fan of Marseille personally.
Me too.
But
it's a difficult place, huh?
I imagine. But so I guess given the title and the framing of the book around migration, I wanted to know how you, as well as your co-editors, were able to decenter yourselves in both the process and making of this book.
I mean, I can start, and I'm sure my colleagues would be happy to pick up. And thank you for this question, which I think is, very central to also some kind of an ongoing journey on how to deal with working on certain sites. No, I think this is really crucial. I think that there is something that I would like to quote shamelessly, kind of a Haraway term, which is this discussion on situated knowledge, that I think is inherent, at least to the way that most of the work that the chair has been doing has been, let's say, trying to do, which is always to work with local partners in a very deep way. So, for instance, Cairo. I mean, I think I've been there, I don't know how many times, but there was a kind of constant back and forth between us, and we have a local partner called Cluster that was very engaged with even the kind of crafting of the curriculum, as well as a kind of system of pairing. So whenever we went with our students, which were also, by the way, not very Western, but in fact from a lot of other places, have a pairing system where they would be always together with a local student. So for instance, that was always a very important, let's say, modus operandi of how we try to work. And I think this is also something that was implemented in the Ethiopian case studies as well. So this kind of possibility to be engaged in a very close relationship, as opposed, I guess, to kind of touch-go approach. So I think that there's also kind of a temporality to these projects which work on cycles, where you really come and return and have a kind of a conversation that is also based on trust as much as possible. But I think this is something that is really a process that has to be, I would say, strengthened. And it was easier for me with Marseille, I guess, because of the kind of locality. And there we also had local partners. I mentioned Bureau des Guides, which have this kind of walking approach as a way also to be in a way grounded, I guess. Yeah.
I suppose two things to follow up on that. First, why then, for example, did you not include your local partner or partners in the authorship or the editorship of the publication? And second, do you think the makeup of your editorship and authorship would look different in light of this year with a global movement towards racial equality and social justice?
Right. So, I mean, just to answer, and I think then Marc and Leo can also pick up. But for instance, in the two Cairo books have a co-authorships with the Cluster, for instance. And I think what happens with the last one, there is a contribution by our local partners, but somehow because it was established over 2 years, and there were like shifts in the teams, it became unclear how to go about that. But I guess that this is something that I would say generally we're let's say still discussing, I guess, and that kind of specificity on the authorship, I think, was also in a way addressed with the kind of exhibition that we did on site as a kind of let's say collaboration. Language was also, in fact, funny enough, a bit of an issue because French is a language that is very strong, and it was difficult to get like let's say contributions in the language in English, and they were a little bit reluctant to do that. So we decided to set with the kind of exhibition. I mentioned also there is a catalog that we specifically, in fact, tailored for them and for the French market is the wrong term, but you get it, audience, so that you would have in fact, you have a kind of essence of the book in the kind of French publication that they actually wish to make available on their website as something that was, let's say, more accessible, in fact. So I think that these are also, when you are kind of in the framework of academic publication, a kind of discussion that probably is an ongoing conversation. But I mean, maybe Marc and Leo would want to pick up.
I very much enjoy Thomas's foregrounding of the term decentering. Okay? So decentering from what to what, by whom. Are there multiple levels of entering this process of decentering oneself, and when do you recenter? Okay, and ultimately, it's what I would like to argue. It has been easier for us than our local partners to decenter and recenter ourselves. Okay, so working with NGOs in Brazil, you always had a sense that they were trapped by the system, and they appreciated us coming in and allowing them to decenter. And then there were exactly moments where they allowed us to decenter ourselves. So I think the trope of the mirror that we used before is extremely helpful, because through these collaborations with local partners, as well as through the collaborations with the students, you end up in a kind of endless process of decentering yourself and recentering towards, you need to recenter in order to get the agenda going again. So I think we need to talk about an oscillation. The other term that I would associate it with this is the one of disagreement. Okay, so there is often agreement and disagreement. And when do you agree? When do you agree for political reasons? When do you agree when you think it might be polite to agree? And when do you fundamentally disagree with an authority or with a partner? And I think, and this is not something that you can state a priori. This is something that evolves in the process. And it's sometimes extremely difficult to disagree with people that are locally embedded within a certain system. And you come from Mars and you say, no, I disagree with you, and you need to follow another trajectory. Okay? This is normally perceived as a form of colonization. So those are the interesting subject matters that Thomas has raised.
Leo, did you want it to contribute?
I think I'm good. I mean, it's a very good question.
Okay, then I can pick up another question. I think somebody asked to ask on screen. Aisha, would you like to come forth?
Hi, can you hear and see me?
We can. Yes,
oh, yes,
now we can. Hi.
Hi, I just want to say thank you again for the talks. They've been really interesting. And I was just wondering, like, when we look at cities and consider how kind of segregation is something that has been embedded into the making of them from centuries ago, what would you say is the move forward for architects and urban designers in kind of unmaking these forms of segregation in terms of the way the city is built and probably kind of the unlearning of the people? Because right now I've just started my dissertation and looking into apartheid in South Africa, specifically Cape Town, and how kind of that system is still in place in the built environment. So I guess your opinion on something like that would be interesting.
Mark, do you want to start?
Well, first of all, thank you for your question, Aisha. This is, you put your finger on significant problems, that segregation is part of the DNA of urbanization, and it has a lot to do also with resource distribution, monetary flows, class exclusivity, etc. And I think the first Jacques Rancière, who we mentioned in this book, the French philosopher, talks about that part of society that has no part. Okay? That part of society that has no part is the fundamental definition of segregated communities. And you find it in the US, in South Africa, in Cairo, in France, wherever you go. Okay? And for us as architects and urban designers, it is inherent to urban design. I mean, this is the unbelievable phenomena. And these blueprint developments and this that we talked about, like Euro-Méditerranée, are all promoting the same kind of narrative. And wherever you go on the globe. And this is where we need to go back to the white collar on the book and say, how can we foreground equity? How can we give a voice to the voiceless? Okay? And how do we move beyond just complaining? Okay? How can we move productively? And we can move productively by dismantling, what is given, by unraveling, material flows, resource flows, by proposing alternative approaches, and not just bottom up, but also top down. That's why I showed that you need to talk to the Minister of Science, of Housing. You need to go at the very highest level and the lowest level. Unfortunately, we are at the weaker part of the equation. Money is power, and Charlotte could talk a lot about power. We need to resist that, and after resisting, we need to find alternative ways of how to move forward. And this is a fight. This is not, and so suddenly you become politically engaged as an urban designer.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, you and Aisha, thanks so much for your question. And I think this is, very, I would say in our case, it's a very urgent question. It was something that was, I mean, in the case of Marseille, it's very blatant, the kind of segregation. I think it is even, it's grounded in the kind of topography of the city. The entire northern districts have no access, very poor access to public transportation, which of course has impact on your chances to get, employment and things like that. So there is a, let's say that the segregation itself has been, ingrained in public policies. In fact, the kind of decisions of where money is being poured. I mean, the city, that the new municipality had to deal with abandoned primary schools, which were, completely basically dumps with like rats and really in a condition that you cannot even imagine in a place where you would assume things are doing, economically pretty well. So that cannot even justify that kind of inequality, which is in fact almost a territorial inequality. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do with that book is also a kind of okay, first of all, and I think that echoes a little bit what Mark is saying, is that there is this imaginaries, the power of imaginaries, which I think is in fact something that we tend to maybe disregard as just being images. But Mark was showing this kind of typical 3Ds of this kind of Dubai landscapes. And in a way, I think that if you're able to also create alternative futures, and I think you can also, there are plenty of other disciplines that have been trying to do that in kind of projecting alternative futures by images. I think that this is also something that is much more powerful that one would think about. Mark also has an example of that kind of image of the Tram of Zurich in the streets of Addis Ababa that was done in 2008. And, you know, at the time, people were just, you know, like looking at this and saying, you know, like, you guys, that's cute, you know, like kind of. And now there's a tram in Addis Ababa, you know, and I'm not saying that it's related. Of course, it's not like we created it, but in a way, I think that the kind of fueling of new imaginaries and alternative futures and possible futures that overcome this segregation. And this is why also it's very important to pay attention to the kind of diversity of your renderings. This is something that people only, it's kind of emerging now in a way that also echoes the question of Thomas earlier, but the kind of paying attention to these things matters, in fact, immensely, much more than one would think. Yeah, Mark, you wanted to...
Yeah, I want to say something about the tram.
Yeah, the tram. It's a good example because
it's very interesting story. We proposed a tram for Addis Ababa to promote public transportation. Okay? This was the vision. You know, you needed to enough. There were too many cars in any case, and those that could own a car, you know, belong to a certain elite. So we said let's have a mode of transportation that would foreground equity. And the government enjoyed the idea. However, they launched a tender that ultimately was accepted by a Chinese company. The tram was then built with Chinese funds and was built by Chinese construction companies and is now maintained and operated by Chinese companies. I mean, this is not what we had in mind. So the idea was somehow, you know, was somebody took hold of the idea, ran with it, but at least there is public transportation. But maybe since time is running, and I have another call in 5 minutes, so I wanted to say something about the Marseillaise. The Marseillaise is the French anthem, and I think it's interesting that Marseille as a city name is part of the title of the national anthem. And the reason, I mean, this dates back to the French Revolution, okay? 1789. When the Marseillaise was launched, and there's a tradition in French history of protest marches, so people that raise their voice, leading from Marseille to Paris. Okay, so walking from Marseille to Paris, whether during the French Revolution or in the 1980s, the Marche de Beurre or the Marche of Assez-le-Feu in 2006, in which people were criticizing the politics of the city as dictated by Paris. Okay? So Marseille itself, being the name of a city that is in the national anthem, is a call for, you know, you say, no, we disagree. Okay, I express dissatisfaction with a certain system, and let's try to change the situation. And that's why I really enjoy the French national anthem.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe go back to Aisha's question about the kind of segregation discussion. I think that all of the schemes, and I didn't show any because we didn't have enough time, but in the book there is also, there are 3 projects that are in Parc Aliste and La Castellane, which are highly segregated, let's say, estates for various reasons, and it's grounded in, let's say, historical and public policies. But I think all of the urban schemes that we've proposed in that book are always, you know, kind of de-neating the kind of policies that make this kind of situations, and try to also discuss policies, right? Which is also a big part of the conversation in this. But of course, the question is always who's listening. No, I think that is one of the big questions. I don't know if there is any other questions, and I also don't know to which extent we're allowed to spill over. And Mark, if you have to leave, I don't know, Leo, is there anything you want to add on the book making or on any of the other questions that were raised? You're mute.
maybe addressing the very last question, I mean, I think in the end, it is down to design as well. I mean, it's about policies, but it also is down to ultimately good architecture and urban design to address these questions.
I mean, here I have to say, like, there is a whole, and Aisha, you kind of raised you opened the kind of can of worm on that, but of course, and it's really interesting. I just want to add, for me, there has been a kind of lingering, and as a kind of as a Marseillaise myself, a lingering question on urban form and how certain estates have kind of crystallized, you know, on the northern sides and on the southern sides. This kind of social segregation of sorts. So on the northern sides, you have, you know, population that comes from, you know, let's say North Africa or the Maghreb, there are these kind of homogeneous estates, and as I said, there are like reasons for that related to this kind of fleeing of a certain class of population towards home ownership, and how that has kind of been fueled through almost like two or three decades of process of rehousing, and then so on and that's the northern side, and on the southern side there is a very big estate called La Rouvière, and I'm sure everyone remembers this who has been to Marseille, which is pretty much in terms of urban form one-to-one to the other side, right? But it is a gated community. It has an army of gardeners. It's highly homogeneous, but this time with the Pieds Noirs, so all the kind of French colons who returned, or sometimes came for the first time in France, but were coming back and bought these apartments, in fact, in offices in, at the time, Algeria or Tunisia, and basically created this entre-soi again, where they are kind of, again, this kind of homogeneous populations of like French middle class that actually have a kind of mechanism, which they try to say that it's not true, but they have a mechanism of segregation, informal segregation. So you can only get an apartment if you are, if you have a kind of godfather that is already living there. So this mechanism that you talk about, they are in the hand, let's say on the one hand, state, you know, policies and so on and so forth through decades, but then they're also just perpetrated on a daily basis in this kind of estates, which for me was extremely fascinating also to see that urban form, and you know, it's a bit not to kind of throw Leo under the bus, but of course design matters. But in this case, you know, how come two estates that have very similar, let's say, architectural qualities, in fact, you could even say, and they're almost contemporary in construction, have so different even, you know, state of decay, and the whole question of maintenance is crucial to this discussion. Ultimately, it goes to say, and because this is something that is very often brought up, at least in France, that, you know, the urban form is guilty, right? And this is something that has been, you know, addressed many times. So I think for me, this question is still pending, I guess, on that. But then again, all these urban design schemes that were proposed are always kind of trying to disconnect that. But I've been talking way too much, so I'm gonna stop.
No, but I like the idea of empowering design. I think it's a good point that Leo is making. But we are empowering design to empower populations, to empower also architecture, to empower the design of policies that are equitable and sustainable, etc. So yes, design goes through everything, and it has a lot to do also with, you know, the ideology of the designer, and whether the designer is willing to question the status quo.
And also there was another point being made when we visited Marseille, which is in fact a segregated area in the making. it has exactly all the recipe to be creating the same situation where people move into apartments. People of very modest means also are given apartments which are, as you say in French, truffés, full of technological things that will break within a certain time frame, and that would basically abandon them with kind of again this kind of maintenance costs that are super high and that have resulted in, so the recipe keeps on going. But we were discussing on how good architecture would make this area still a place which is relatively agreeable to live. So there was this conversation on the kind of design in that sense. So is there a kind of sturdy design that can sustain lack of maintenance or things like that? That was also kind of a discussion. But Aisha, you wanted to maybe add something? I saw you were unmuting yourself, and then I guess
I need to go.
Okay, then, but we can stay on one more question. Rosie, is that fine?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Marc, thanks a lot. Maybe you want to just say one last thing, or yeah.
No, I just say thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the question. It was also great to see some of our former students assembled here online.
Thanks.
Remain healthy.
Bye,
Thank
Marc.
you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, Aisha, if you wanted to maybe get the a point across, and then I think we could probably conclude. I don't know.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to quickly add in, talking about the responsibility of architects and urban planners and the likes. I came across this term of participatory urban planning and things like that, because obviously when we create these structures and these forms or buildings, they're inevitably going to be used by people. And it's just thinking about that superiority complex and whether these buildings are allowing people to showcase that, or it's muting kind of people thinking that they're more superior to others. So I guess it's just thinking, like you said, who listens? And because you think of who listens, it's then who's responsible for something like this. But it's whether involving the citizens who are going to use these spaces is something that urban planners and architects should be thinking about moving forward. I think when it comes to doing individual buildings, it's probably easier because it's a specific building. But when it comes to designing the urban form, even though everyone has their right to the city, the right to the city it is something still given to the people of power, I guess, when it comes to designing these things. I don't know, I guess, like you said, it's a can of worms, and it's probably not one.
But I think it's a very important question. I mean, personally, I haven't really fully, kind of establish a kind of position on that, because I think, for instance, that there is a little, for me, participation at times is a little bit like sustainability. It has been robbed of meaning, it's kind of an empty, it's an empty shell, it's been like, we all know that sustainability is something that is, it's greenwashing. I mean, okay, I don't know any proper use of that. I mean, at least in the industry, I think this is something that is just not true. So, and at times, I think that participation has suffered the same fate, which means it has been used to let's say, legitimize certain projects without really kind of, you just assemble a bunch of people that are around, and the loudest one, also usually the ones who have free time, and those are the ones who are ultimately talking. So you also have and also run into a kind of question about democracy. Who are the ones? So who are the ones who speak? Who are the ones who listen? I mean, I think this is a very, urgent question in that sense. So I haven't personally fully come to terms with what is the best way to go about that. I think that there are sometimes interesting answers, everything that is kind of questioning, let's say, for instance, typological, architectural typologies that are assuming people are living one way is kind of something that should be constantly questioned. I mean, the three room apartments kind of scheme, I think is something that needs urgently to be reassessed. I think we've seen in the pandemic that people are living, in ways that architects are not even, thinking. So how can you make sure, and that goes back a little bit to Leo's point, which is to say, how do you make sure that your design is working for everyone? I think that is where I would locate somehow the responsibility of architects and designers. So yeah, I think participation is a bit of a slippery, it's like a soap bar, I think. Okay, I think we can. If there's any other question or anything, then I think we will call it a day on that. I think it's been super nice to be able to show the book. I mean, this was kind of the first time that we were actually able to feature the book and also discuss a little bit about the content. So yeah, I think it was super nice. And I'm also happy to see like all or not see. Actually, hey guys, turn on your camera so that we can see you. That would be very nice. It's this kind of screens, black screens, that's kind of like so frustrating. So thanks. Yeah, so much better. Great.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.
I see people dressing up like, oh my God, I cannot show myself naked. Yeah, and thank you for your question, Aisha and Thomas and I think there was Estella also asked a question. So yeah, no, thanks a lot. That was really great to bring some of the topics that the book was trying to address. And yeah, thanks a lot.